Hi, everyone. We are just a couple minutes past the top of the hour, so I think we will go ahead and get started. Uh, First of all, I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to be here with us at Ascendal. We're very excited for today's webinar on leveraging a minimum viable product to speed time to market and reduce risk with speakers Dave Todaro and Tom Schwendler. I am Diana Getman, president of Ascendal, and I'm really happy to be your moderator today. We have a really great turnout. Before we begin the presentation, I just want to remind you that we will be running a live Q&A toward the end of the webinar. We have enabled the Q&A feature, which you should see in the Zoom controls on your screen. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation. If you miss anything in today's presentation, don't worry. We will send you a link to this webinar's recording along with the slide deck. So let me take a moment just to talk a little bit about Ascendal. For those of you who don't know us, Ascendal is a leader in custom software development. We partner with companies as their full service development team to create mobile and web applications to drive their business goals. We also offer product strategy, product design, and agile consulting services. Here are just a few of our clients. We are recognized experts in our field. We are a Microsoft partner, and we love to share our many years of experience by teaching others. We have spoken to thousands of people around the world, presenting regularly with a variety of organizations at many different types of events. And we wrote the book. Our founder, Dave, is a recognized expert in our field. He spent 2 years to capture everything we know about Agile development and published this 500-page epic guide to Agile in 2019. So let me go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. Dave Todaro is the founder and CEO of Ascendal. Software is in his DNA. He thrives on using his 37 years of software development experience to help our clients achieve business results that drive growth and profitability. Tom Schwendler is a product owner with Ascendal. He is a strong asset due to his 30+ years of software development experience, which Tom leverages to repeatedly drive innovation and advancement for our clients. All right, I think it's time to move on to the good stuff. Let's get this started, shall we? I will hand my virtual mic over to Dave.
Thank you, Di. So welcome everybody. Like Di said, really appreciate you all taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy day. We've got a great group of folks joining us from all around the world today. And like Di said, we're going to be talking about the minimum viable product first. And unfortunately, we need to start on a little bit of a down note. The harsh reality is most software projects fail. They either fail to meet their schedule projections, their budget projections, or in a worst case scenario, everything else goes well, the product is shipped, but unfortunately, it's not what anybody wanted. And that's really what we're going to be hitting on today with this discussion about the minimum viable product. The MVP approach removes, I can't say all of the risk from software development, but it really removes the biggest one, which is you build something that either doesn't quite meet what the market is looking for, or in a worst case scenario, it's what nobody wanted and no one's willing to pay for, even worse. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Tom Schwendler, and he's going to bring this topic full circle for you. I'll be chiming in along the way, and we'll be co-presenting this topic for you today. Go ahead, Tom.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave. And again, thanks everybody for spending some time with us here today. So I want to preserve as much time as possible, so we'll get right to it. So as Dave mentioned, you know, the software development industry is difficult. And there's a statistic that I found that really represents that. So IBM did a study, and they found that 2/3 of all mobile software application development, new projects, have failed. So that's a pretty astounding statistic. And what they found is that there are 3 main reasons for this project failure. The first one is that they built the product wrong. So they got the product done, but not going through a good process of Q&A and testing. There were a number of bugs in the product, and got out to market and people were using it. Maybe it had a lot of features, but if it wasn't reliable, had a lot of bugs in it, people wouldn't use it. So that's one of the big issues, the reasons of these project failures. The next one was more of a scheduling problem, not knowing when the project was going to be finished. So, using that waterfall approach where you're working on one layer of the product at a time, you never get a full understanding of when your project is going to be complete, because no part of it is ever complete until the very end. So not having an understanding of when that project completion is, the project can carry on for a very long period of time. And also your sales and marketing team aren't able to ramp up to get ready for the new product to go out to market. So those two reasons were some of the reasons, but the biggest reason for the project failure that they found, as Dave mentioned, they actually built the wrong product. And that's really the core of the focus of our discussion here today. Is what we're going to talk about is how we can use an MVP approach to avoid this, right? So what happens is the main stakeholder of the project might have an understanding of what they think they want to send out to users. They spend a lot of time and money building this full set of features. They get it out there, and it wasn't really what the users wanted. There could be a number of reasons for that. Maybe markets changed, new competitor came out, something happened, but it turns out that a lot of wasted time building this project. There are a number of examples out there of products that no one really wanted. And I put together a couple of the more famous ones here. The first one, Google Goggles. Who remembers that, right? So just that pair of glasses with a camera on one end, and you could go around and scan things and look up things. Above and beyond, there were some privacy concerns and some medical concerns. But the biggest issue was that this product never really fulfilled any need of a user. It was more done just to kind of be trendy, but it never really had a customer need for it. So again, no market research done to see was it really fulfilling the need of a customer. Another famous fail, Windows Vista. Remember this one? So this was coming off the heels of a pretty stable and very compatible Windows NT version. They came out with Windows Vista, and it turned out it was much less stable and much less worked on many less devices, right? So it was a big flop for Microsoft. Another one from Google Plus, right? So the problem with this project, this was built in response to Facebook, right? It was more built out of fear of losing market share. They wanted to compete with Facebook. They didn't try to create something unique, something new to fulfill the need of a user. It was more just built out of fear. And again, that was the reason that one failed. And then the last one, probably the most the biggest one is New Coke. Remember New Coke? Talk about a product that people didn't really need. So those are some examples of projects that have failed, and there's many more, but I thought I would just start things off with some examples.
And just to add to that, Tom, one thing is that it's not that these companies sought to enter something into the market and have it flop. Obviously, they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars, and I'm sure they did do a lot of market research. And the problem is that you could research till the cows come home, and it's not until you put a product into end users' hands that you know whether it will work or not. And you could run focus group upon focus group. I've done it. I've run focus group. One of the products I built, I ran a focus group for 1.5 years. We thought we had it all nailed down. We wrote hundreds of pages of specifications. We showed that focus group mockups. We got together with them 3 or 4 more times over the subsequent year. We built the product, we put it in their hands, and they said, that's not quite what I wanted. And we pulled our hair out saying, looking at each other and saying, well, what the heck, how did we go wrong? And that really ties into this concept, which is users don't know what they want until they use it. So
That's a
putting the
really good.
product,
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
I was just to finish that, putting the product into the end user's hands as quickly as you can and have them tell you, yes, I like this, no, I don't like it, or I kind of like it, but can you change this? That's super important. So it's a little bit turning things on their head. So when we build software, we kind of assume that we know what users want, especially when we ask them and they tell us this is what we want. What we need to do is instead assume the opposite. We have no idea what the user wants and they don't either. And so what we need to do is we need to prove it. We need to prove it to ourselves and we need to prove it to the users that yes, in fact, this is what you want. And it's going to all hinge around this concept of the MVP.
Right. I almost think about it sometimes. It's kind of you're building a test product, and it's just to get it out in front of people's hands, having them use it, and let them give you the feedback so that you can direct the development to make something, more full and full featured. But we'll talk about all this as we go through the presentation. Excellent. All right, let's continue on. So what we're going to talk about today is the minimum viable product, right? So that's what we're all here about. So as we talked about here, what a minimum viable product is, it's a very core set of features that just enough to make your product viable. And the whole purpose of it, as we just talked about, get something in front of your users' hands so that you can get feedback on what truly the functionality that they need. So it doesn't need to be anything huge, anything big. It just needs to fulfill a need so that your customers will use it and give you feedback on more things that they want. All right. So in order for the MVP to be viable, it has to have 3 main characteristics. The first one is it has to have enough value that people are willing to use it or buy it. So again, it doesn't have to be full featured, but it does have to fulfill a need. It's not worth creating a product that is so small that it doesn't really provide any value to your customers. The second thing is that it needs to be clear that this is set up to get feedback from those core set of customers so that you can direct the development to add the new features that they're looking to get out of this. So, and it has to have enough. So the idea is that you are providing them, they understand that there's going to be future benefit to them so that they will retain as those early adopters. And then third is that, again, you need to provide that feedback loop so that you can guide your future development. This is why some people, they call it the minimum lovable product. So the key concept of defining what's in your MVP is keeping it small. Less is more. The biggest problem that people have in trying to work with this MVP product or process is they put in too many features. So really what you want to do here is you want to put in the minimum number of features to make it a viable product. So you're not trying to get the smallest product that has all the features that your customers want. You really just want to have those core set of features that are really, really, truly required for this product to be viable. So what we try to do here is we say we want to just focus on the minimum. All right. So we talked about what that MVP is, what it means, and some of the advantages. But what we're going to talk about here is how does using an MVP really help the process? So the first thing it does is, because you're focusing on those core set of features and getting those out to market first, you're really building, the first thing you're building is what is most important in that product. Those are those key, going through this process and identifying what those key features are. That is, by definition, you're building what's most important first. And even within building the MVP product, going through that process of building it, if you're using the Agile principles, you're building the most important features of the MVP first. So you even have an opportunity to, before your MVP is complete, to maybe get a pre-release or a demo version out to these core customers, early onset customers, to get their feedback while you're building the MVP. And that might even give you even a further head start.
Yeah, there's another really important takeaway here, and it's something that it's a little bit of the dirty little secret of software. And those of you guys who've been around the block know the problem with software is it's extraordinarily difficult to predict in terms of a schedule. How long is this going to take to build? If we're building an office building, and let's just assume we're not doing something super fancy and using brand new construction techniques, but a run-of-the-mill office building, well, that's been done hundreds, if not thousands of times before. We know how to build an office building. We can predict to a pretty accurate level how long it's going to take, and still construction runs over. I'm sure you've heard plenty of stories of the house that was supposed to be done in June, and finally by the end of November, it was ready to move in. And that's a house, something that's been done millions upon millions of times. The problem with software is that no one's done it before, right? No one has built your product before. Why? Because if someone has already built the exact same product, there's no reason to build it. Just go use that other product. So by its nature, software is always a pioneering effort. And because of that, because there's some degree of unknowns with requirements, some degree of unknowns with the technology, how exactly we're going to make this work, and we basically have this clean screen in front of us ready for us to write code, it's extraordinarily unpredictable. So although we can use some estimating techniques and get a rough idea, I'm not saying that you can't figure out how long it should take to build your product, and Tom will talk a little bit about that later in the deck. Because of this degree of unknown, this point right here is probably the number one takeaway of this whole session today. You have to prioritize ruthlessly and always build what's most important. Why? Because when you think it was going to take a month and it takes 2 months, if you built the wrong stuff, you can't get that month back. So part of this process, which is really part of the Agile approach, is acknowledging uncertainty and acknowledging risk. And instead of saying, well, I'm sure that it'll all work out, and sort of ignoring the risk, we embrace the risk and we aggressively manage it by using techniques such as this. So this is one of the key points. It does tie into the overarching MVP concept, and Tom will hit on a little bit later as well. But I just wanted to hammer this one home. You can't get the time back, and you can't actually predict it. As long you've got the business leaders that will walk down into the development area and say, all right, how long do you think it'll take to do that? And the poor programmer is looking up at the person and saying, I don't know. And they want to say like an hour to 2 weeks, but they don't want to have the person look at them. And so they say, I think it'll be done in 2 days based on nothing. So what we want to do is make sure that we are always prioritizing ruthlessly, building what's most important. And that's really at the foundation of the Agile approach and at the foundation of this MVP technique.
It's very true, Dave. And using that approach of building the most important thing first, that's going to be critical as and what we're going to talk about this in the future, but if the project starts to go off track, right? So, and we'll talk about that as we get down there. but it all ties together. Excellent. All right, another benefit. It's pretty obvious. Working on a much smaller product, you're going to get to market much more quickly. But it's more than that, right? Because by getting to market more quickly, you can scoop up those early adopters quicker. If you do have competing people, you can get to market before your competitors with similar ideas. You get more of that slice of the market, all because you're working on that core set of functionality, getting that out to the public and getting those customers loyal to you. By getting it out to market earlier, now you can start gaining that business intelligence. So you're not relying on your best guess of what your customers want. Your customers are actually telling you what they want. So, and it's more than just feature requests. You gain an understanding of how they're purchasing your product. You get that customer feedback, good and bad. Maybe it's things they don't like about that MVP. You can then make the changes necessary to correct them. You get a real understanding of how people are using your product. You know, maybe you put something out there and you realize people are using this in a completely different way than you first intended. You might then want to say, you know what, this might have an opportunity. We can market this in a whole different way. So there's a lot of business intelligence that you can gain by getting this product out to market quick. The other thing you have by using this MVP approach is you have the flexibility to change direction. You haven't invested years and years of development time putting something together that locks you into that direction of that product. So again, putting it out to the market early, understanding and listening to what your customers are saying, maybe you need to change the direction of the development and focus on something and change kind of the direction of the product than what you originally intended. You know, there's a lot of things out there that can cause this to happen. Maybe market forces changes, a new competitor comes out. You know, maybe there's a new technology that comes up that makes your product, you can do it in a completely different way. All those kinds of things can affect the direction of your product. And by using this MVP approach, you have a lot of flexibility to change. And finally, and probably one of the most important ones is costs, right? By using this MVP approach, you're going to reduce your project costs tremendously. You know, it's very easy to sink tons of money into a full featured product, and you get it out to market, and you know what, that's what people didn't really want. By using the MVP approach and doing the things that we talked about before, building the most important things first, what you're doing is you're reducing the risk of spending time building something or even features that people don't want or aren't going to use. And that's really where the cost savings comes in. Okay, so we've kind of gone over the idea, what is an MVP and some of the benefits of using it. So we're going to start now getting a little bit deeper. We're going to start talking about, you know, how do you define what's in your MVP and how you start using it. So we'll first start about how you define what's in your MVP. As you remember before, we talked about keeping it small, right? Working on as minimal as possible. So what you do is you do your research, you find what your customers are looking for, and you come up with that core set of features. But then you might even have to take it a little bit farther than that. So many of you might know Eric Ries. He's the author of The Lean Startup, and he actually coined this phrase of the minimum viable product. Well, when asked, how do you come up with what should be in your MVP, he came up with this process. He says, okay, take all the features that you think are critical that should be in your MVP and cut them in half. Now repeat that process 2 more times. And what you end up with is truly what should be in your MVP. So this is kind of a a tongue-in-cheek example, but it's actually true. And the point is that it goes to that point that the problem that most people have when defining what's in their MVP is there are too many features in their MVP. And I have personal experience with this, that, we came up with these what we felt was the core set of functionality. And by the time we were done, we actually had to reduce it quite a bit. So always remember, if you really thinking, does this really need to be in my MVP? Is this really a critical feature that needs to go there? So it has to be scrutinized very, very carefully.
You may look at this and say, well, this is ridiculous. I've skinnied this thing down. We thought we were going to have, maybe 200 features or 300 features in the whole product. And we really spent a lot of time skinning it down to like these 75. And there's no possible way that someone can use this product without these 75 features. So what are you talking about? How can I slice it in half and slice it in half and slice it in half? And if I release this thing with, just these first 12 features, isn't the market going to look at me and say, well, this product kind of sucks. It has like nothing in it. What you need to remember is that what's vastly more important is understanding as quickly as you possibly can, does this product have legs? And remember, the assumption is this product does not have legs until we prove it. And everybody, me included, assumes that what we're going to create is going to be loved by everybody, and we're going to generate another X million dollars a year in revenue for our company. But by and large, people don't like the products that you build, even if you ask them over and over and over again, what is it that you want? So when you get it into users' hands and they say, I don't see this feature, can you add it? You say, well, as a matter of fact, that's on our plan. It's coming up soon. And what's really nice about that is that next feature might have been number 62 on your list. But now what you start hearing, and this ties into what one of the previous slides, now what you start hearing is that feature is pretty important, and you hear it over and over and over again. So now you know it shouldn't be number 72 on your list anymore. It should probably be in the next 3 or 4 features that you build. So remember, we don't know what people want. They don't know what they want until they actually start using the product. And you have no idea what's going to be important to them until they start using something. So that's why this exercise, although on its surface might seem simply impossible, it's really critical to do. And I'll just give you a quick example. Let's just say we're going to build the next social media app. And we know that we want to post stuff to a feed, and we want to post videos, and we want to post links, and we want to upload pictures, and we want to favorite our stuff on our feed, and we want to integrate with Twitter, we want to integrate with Facebook, and it's going to be this sort of aggregating thing, and that's what's going to make it different. Well, the minimum viable product, when you first put it in people's hands, might just take one of those innovative things, just one of those innovative things, and you implement it without any of the other stuff. Because, well, what if no one wants the next social media app? That's your worst case scenario, and that's what you need to find out right now, or as close to right now as you possibly can. So instead of taking 3 or 6 or 10 months, however long it's going to take to build out all of this wonderful, innovative stuff that the world has never seen, you just pick that one thing that you think is going to be different, and that one thing that you really want to have at the heart of your product and what you think is your key differentiator. And you build that, and you have people start using it and see if you're right. And if you're right, awesome. Now you can charge ahead, you can get more funding, you can build more stuff, and you can build the stuff that's most important. So another super important point here.
Yeah, maybe Google would have used that advice when they were doing Google Plus, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So you've determined now what are the features that you want in your MVP. You've whittled it down to that true core set of features. How do I estimate the size of that? And more importantly, how long it's going to take to complete this project? So this is where we use some of our Scrum and Agile techniques. So the first thing that we would do is we would convert those features into user stories, and then discuss those stories with the development team, come up with an understanding of how we would build those, and more importantly, how difficult it would be, how much effort it would take to build those. Then with the team, you can estimate the relative size of each user story. And then once you've got them all estimated, add them all up and you have the total size, the amount of effort that it's going to take to get this project complete. Then you get started. Once you've got some development, once you have some of these stories completed, then you can start, then you can determine what the velocity is of your development team, and then project using that velocity and how many story points are remaining, project what an estimated time of completion will be. And the beauty of this process is as you go farther into the project, the accuracy of that projection will get better as time goes on.
Yeah, so this ties into what I was saying earlier, which is, although there is a ton of unpredictability in software, we do have these techniques to get our arms around it. We do need to understand, is it going to take 2 months to build this MVP, 6 months to build this MVP? But we might not be able to predict it's going to take 41 working days. It's because simply we don't know quite yet. The full discussion of this is beyond the scope of this presentation, but there's quite a bit of detail to it. It's worked great. We've leveraged this technique now. I've leveraged it for about the past 10 or 12 years, and it really works. I wrote 3 chapters about just this process in my book, so it won't be quite within scope of today.
Excellent. All right, so you're working on your project, and it's coming along, but what you're finding is for some reason it's going off track. What can you do to get this project back on track? Well, there's a couple of things here. So by using an Agile approach, after each sprint, the first thing you do, or one of the things that you do after sprint review, is you look at what your projected completion date is, right? So if after a few sprints, you're seeing that your projected date is continuing to get pushed back, then you know you've got a problem. Your schedule is off track. So really the first step is recognizing that you are going off track. Once you get that, when you understand that you are, the best way to get back on track is to remove those lowest priority stories. And there could be a couple of reasons why you're off track. It's not that uncommon. Once you've got a few sprints completed and you have some user stories that you can provide to your stakeholders, they can start using those stories and demoing them out and trying them themselves. They might ask for new functionality or new stories to be added. You know, they start getting excited about it. Well, what if we can do this? Can we do that? And it's very easy for those stakeholders to request more features, more stories. And we call that scope creep, and it happens all the time. And so that gets into your MVP. Now, all of a sudden, what was a smaller project is turning into a larger and larger project. So that's one reason why you could go off track. Another one is maybe things are more difficult than you originally estimated to complete. So, estimating, again, as Dave said, software development is a very, very complex and difficult thing. So maybe our estimates weren't that great and things taking longer than we thought. So if that is the case, then really we have to decide with the stakeholders, is this new later completion date, is that acceptable? And if it's not, we want to get back to our original track. Really the way that we need to do that is to remove those lower priority user stories. So if we're following, Agile processes here, we're going to have a prioritized backlog, and the user stories at the bottom of that backlog in the MVP version are the lowest priority stories. So by pulling those out of scope, we can reduce the number of remaining stories and get back on track. But one important thing we need to do, if we do remove user stories to get back on track, what we need to do is make sure that that product is still viable. Okay, let's keep moving on here. All right, so now using our process of moving ahead in time, we've completed our MVP product and we want to go to market with it. What we found is there's a strategy that can be used that can help this out. One thing that you could potentially do is release your MVP, invite a few of your high loyalty customers to try out your MVP. Get them to be the first ones to start using it and get feedback right away. And have them understand that this is just the beginning, right? That gives these people, these customers, a unique opportunity to shape this product, right? It's almost like they have the ability to custom design some software without going through the whole development process themselves. It really is, you can be set up and promoted in a way where it's a win-win for both you and these early adopter customers. And then as you start adding more functionality to it, start increasing the customer base as you update the product and add more features to it. But one thing that's important to do, you want to expand as quickly as possible, but you want to make sure that you have the infrastructure, the support staff. You want to make sure that you have the quality, everything is there as your product grows, that you're able to maintain that user experience, that high level user experience of using it. So what happens after you've completed your MVP? How do you work in the new feature requests, the things that are happening? Well, again, for us, what works best using this agile approach, you add this new functionality one production sprint at a time. One thing that's critical, any bugs that are found, you need to address those as early as possible. It's a very, very important one key thing that we do at Ascendle. Whenever a bug is found, that goes right to the top of the product backlog and are resolved as quickly as possible. We don't want to have bugs being built up and having that affect us the ability to put out new functionality because we're waiting to get some bugs fixed. And then as feature requests come in, we address those again through the sprint process. What we'll do is we'll prioritize, we take those feature requests, we turn them into user stories, and based on what we already have in our product backlog, we'll prioritize those feature requests with the existing backlog. We'll figure out how to build those, and then we fit those into the sprints along with the other work that we're doing. So it's all depending upon what is the priority of those new features. Maybe there's a new potential client that will start buying, major client that'll start buying your product if this new feature is added, then that would probably put it at a high level of priority.
And you may look at this and say, well, this is great, but we're not an agile shop. So how do I do this? To get the benefit of the MVP, you do need to implement at least a few of the agile principles. The biggest one being you need to build a little bit of the product and make it actually usable. So if your approach is typically that you're going to do a design for 6 months and do a technical architecture implementation for 6 months and then build out the data layer and then build out the business layer, et cetera, this isn't going to work for you. And I would encourage you to figure out how to kind of turn that on its end, so to speak, and start building small slices of the application and make it totally usable. So instead of building it horizontally, start building it vertically. The other key thing here is that you can't be building and building and building for 6 months and then start fixing bugs after that. You need to test and fix as rapidly as possible because, again, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to build something that we can put into people's hands and actually have them use. That's a very small piece of what we envision the product eventually turning into. So that, I realize, is a pretty heavy lift for most waterfall organizations, but it is absolutely worth it. You will save your company millions of dollars if you make the shift. Doesn't have to be full-blown agile, doing absolutely everything with Scrum or whatever other agile process you might be interested in. But if you do this, this can revolutionize your R&D process.
Excellent point, Dave. Thanks. All right. So to kind of finalize here, we've talked about a lot of things. You know, there's only so much that we can explain in 45 minutes or so. Mostly major concepts here, but I wanted to relay to you some personal experiences of me. So to really lay out that this isn't just theory, it really works. So in the years that I've been with Ascendal and using this MVP approach, I've had a number of projects where I've had some really interesting results. So in one project, we took we worked with a client that had been working on a product for about 2 years, and they were having, you know, not so great success getting something out there. They've been working on it. They never really were able to finish it, to get it out to market. We took it, converted it into kind of an MVP approach, decided on what are the core features, and we got the project completed in 6 months and in customers' hands. On another project, we were working on an MVP project, and we noticed that it started to go off track. And what was happening is this was this classic case of scope creep. So when I was talking about the scope creep and how the stakeholders can start adding, you know, they can start using the functionality of the features that you've made and wanting to make requests and add new things, that's exactly what happened in this case. So we saw this as we were in sprint review. We saw that our estimated projection dates were going back. So we had a really hard session with our stakeholders and said, okay, if this release date is really important to you, we need to reprioritize this backlog. And we ended up removing about 1/3 of the user stories. We got the project back on track and we released on time. On another project, I got to say, this one probably went about as perfect as it could. So we had a core set of functionality. We really, truly defined a good MVP set of features. We worked on it. Once we were able to establish a velocity, we created that projected release completion date, and we continued on through the project, and we actually finished the project exactly 1 day before our original estimate that was made 4 months prior. And if you'll notice, because of the months there, it was really just a matter of 6 months that, again, in 6 months, we got that MVP product done. So we're not talking about multi-year projects here. In a lot of cases, you can get these MVP projects done in a fairly short amount of time. And in my last example, it's another classic case. We were working on an MVP project, and our client came to us and said that what they wanted to do, different from our original plan, is they decided they wanted to announce and release this MVP project at a trade show, which was about 2 months prior to what our original estimate project completion date was. So we talked with them, we worked through the backlog, we reprioritized the project, we were able to rescope it, and we got it complete in time for them to release the project at the trade show that they wanted. So that talks about the flexibility of changing market or changing conditions. So all of these things that, we kind of talk about here as, just words, I know from experience that this really does work. So we do, there are a number of places where these topics are in Dave's book, and we highly recommend if you don't have this book, this goes over this subject and many more in detail.
Absolutely, thanks, Tom. And just to kind of recap, the key takeaways here, and I kind of underscored those throughout the process. Key points would be, you don't know what your customers want until they get it in their hands, and they don't either. So you better not spend millions of dollars trying to build something before actually having someone use it. This MVP approach allows you to do that. Ruthlessly prioritizing those features and skinnying down that minimum viable product as small as you possibly can, and using some agile techniques to drive the product to a usable state as frequently as you can, squashing bugs as soon as they come up or as quickly as possible. Super important. And the big value that you get is knowing that the product is in fact viable in the market, because until someone pays for it, it's not viable. Or if you're not charging for it until it drives some of your other business objectives, it's not viable. And the other huge thing is that it allows you to steer the continuing development based on not what you believe is most important in the product, but what your users believe are most important. So with that, let's go ahead and cycle into the questions. Lots of questions here. We've got about 10 minutes left. Like Di said in the chat window, if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up via email. And Tom, why don't you go ahead and cycle to the next slide so folks have our contact info in case they want to reach out. There's a free copy, or a free sample, I should say, of my book on our website at ascendal.com. You can go ahead and check that out. The book's available on Amazon. Trust me, I don't make a lot of money on that book. It covers printing costs and some of our other costs. A ton of information in there, and feel free to pick up a copy. So first question here, and thanks for upvoting. If you see questions you like, go ahead and upvote them so we can ruthlessly prioritize the questions here. So the first one, and I know that you can all read those questions, so I'm not going to read them out loud. If you can't see them, go ahead and click that Q&A button with the red 10 at the bottom of your screen. But the first one, biggest challenge is addressing with stakeholders what will not be in the original release / solution, even though it may have been talked about with great interest. I think what you want to do with your stakeholders is say, look, this is not like an all or nothing thing. It's not like if it doesn't get on the ship is leaving the harbor forever and we can't possibly add another feature. What we really need to look at the MVP like is, this is the starting point. So let's just get started. One technique you can use with your stakeholders when you're force ranking your backlog is to ask them, all right, if you could have just one thing on this list, let's just work with me for a minute. If you could just have one thing on this list, what would it be? And they say, all right, I don't want just one thing. I know, play along. If it's just one thing, what would it be? All right, it's that one. All right, if you could have two things, what would it be? If you could have three things, what would it be, et cetera. And that can get them into this mindset of, okay, well, you're not saying I can't have some of this stuff. All you're asking me to do is prioritize. And that's absolutely right, especially since we don't know when the MVP is going to be something that we actually release. And in fact, what we would encourage you to do, as Tom mentioned, is show the product to people as early and as often as you possibly can. And what's really interesting is that what they actually say that they want and when they want it might differ from when you think you're going to release the MVP. So even though you're defining this small product, as you start showing it to people and they give you feedback, at some point they're going to say, can I use it? That's when you know you have an MVP that you would ship. And that ties into Peg's question, which is, what's the difference between a minimum viable product and a minimum releasable product? My definition of a minimum releasable product, if we're following the Agile guidelines, which says we need to keep the product in a potentially shippable state or usable state at all times, meaning it's not riddled with bugs and kind of falling apart, If we keep it in that shippable state and we show it to people, the releasable product is when people say they want it. And then we release it. If you're doing sort of a pure Scrum process at the end of a sprint, whether it's 1 week to a calendar month, let's just say it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks go by, we show the product to people. 2 weeks go by, we show the product to people. They say, I want that. Next 2 weeks, we do a release sprint. And they have it in their hands in 2 weeks or less. And that's the minimum releasable product. So I try to cover 2 questions there with that one. So if your product is not new, but a better take of an existing competitor, should the MVP include all the competitor's feature plus core new features? Absolutely not. Because it's highly likely that your competitor has a bunch of crap in their product that no one actually needs. Real good example, I don't know if you're familiar with 37 Signals. They built all kinds of different projects. Basecamp is one of their more famous projects, or products rather. They purposely, in their charter, said, we're going to say no to most features, and we're going to put the smallest possible set of features in and keep the product as simple as we possibly can. Copying your competitor's product feature by feature, and worse, waiting to release it until you have all of their features is, I think, going to be something that is going to kind of really tie you up in knots. So I would not do that. I would take the minimum approach. So how will the user be able to understand the extra value being added? Well, I would say if you're copying your product, your competitor's product feature by feature, why would I buy your product? It has no differentiator. So I would think about, why is our product going to be different? And one of the differences might be that it has 10% of the features as our competitor's product, because our competitor's product is way too complex. I can't get my arms around this thing and actually get my work done. So I would strongly encourage you to not do that. What about potential competitors copying ideas? We do get this question. Well, you know, this is sort of a skunkworks thing. We want to keep this under covers. You may not release it to the world right away. What you might do is you might have a select smaller group sworn to secrecy. And that's your sort of private beta group or private focus group. And Apple does this with their products, right? You hear the stories about, oh my God, the guy brought the prototype to the bar and lost the iPhone and you know, got in a lot of trouble. Now, you can't carry software around quite like that, but with your software product, you can do the same thing. Have them sign an NDA, swear them to secrecy, and you can get that feedback. So that's a way you can kind of hide that away from your, you know, your competitors if you're concerned about that. Let's see, when you have a huge project rather, I'm assuming you can't create all the stories up front and estimate them. How would you estimate a huge project? One that could take a year or two. We actually do this all the time. We routinely estimate projects that might take a year or two. And what we do is we just make sure that we chop the product up into a list that's manageable, somewhere in the sort of 75 to 125, 150 user stories, and we estimate them. And that might be a little bit confusing. Well, this is this huge project. It's going to have like 500 user stories. It's all a matter of size. So I can boil down any product into 75 to 125 features. It's just a matter of how big each one of those user stories is. So I would go ahead and do that. Again, in my book, if you, once you get this slide deck, in those chapters that I outline, I explain exactly how we do that. We brainstorm what we call a roles and features list. We turn those into user stories, we estimate them, and we use some techniques to figure out how fast we might move. So absolutely, you can do that with your project. And one other technique that we use is we group our stories into must-haves, nice-to-haves, and someday maybes. So we know that there are some features that are probably a little bit aspirational. Maybe we've asked some of our customers about them and they say, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe someday. Those someday maybes, maybe you decide that you're going to set those aside for now and just focus on the estimating process for the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. But you can absolutely go ahead and estimate all of those across any sort of time frame.
And I would take that a little bit one step further, Dave.
Sure.
The advantage of doing that is you would prioritize those very, very large stories into what those, like you had mentioned, the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, someday maybes. And then the idea is you just focus on those high priority stories first. So what you have when you're estimating this entire project is you don't really have a whole series of stories. What you have are a series of epics. They're very, very large features. Then you take that first one and you dive into that one. That first story that's at the top of the backlog, if it's prioritized right, has the most business value. Now you focus all your effort on that one story, divide it up into multiple stories, figure out how you're going to do it, and you work on that one first. And you just continue down the process. So what you're doing is you're spending your most amount of effort on those highest priority stories first.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see, what technical, questions jumping around a little bit. What technical tools do you use to manage your feature list and your projects? We just happen to use Jira, one of the more popular agile project management tools. But you can manage your feature list really with any tool. I mean, you could do it with Excel if you really wanted to. An agile tool such as Jira, and there's all kinds of other agile tools out there. It just makes it a little bit easier to manage what you need. But at its most basic, it is just a list with one line each, managing those features. And again, the prioritization is the most critical part, because then what happens is you spend more time on those features that are closer to the top of the list. Let's see, any recommendations choosing a good enough effort estimation tool? Again, I talk about this in my book. We use a process which is called planning poker, which is to get a group of folks that have enough technical know-how about the product and what might be involved in building it, and they spend some time together and do some estimating. And it takes some time, because they do need to kind of discuss what do we mean by each of these user stories and scratch at it a little bit. It's one of those, it takes more time than you think, but not as much time as you might fear. We routinely do estimating for products that might take, call it 6 months to 18 months in a couple of weeks, maybe with like 1 or 2 2-hour meetings a day, and just to crank through that. Let's see, do we always use an MVP approach for all our software projects? I would say that we use these principles for every project. Whether or not there's the actual term thrown around, minimum viable product, it kind of depends on the specific project. But what we always, always, always do is work with the client to force rank the feature list, that product backlog, because we know the worst thing that can happen is that something takes a little bit longer than we thought, and the client comes back and says, well, why didn't you get to this? Because this is really important. And we say, oh, shoot, well, we can't get back that time. Do we provide any incentive to encourage customers to try out the software? You can do this. I mean, you can offer prizes if you're having trouble getting customers. But if you do have customers, particularly existing customers, and they're excited about your product, and you can, like Tom said, you can go out and sort of pick off those customers that are a little bit more friendly to your company or more engaged. And what I've found is that the reward to them is feeling like it becomes their product, just like Tom said. So I can look at it, I'm gonna give you feedback, and much to their amazement, because they're used to their voices never being heard, in 2 or 4 weeks, they see their feature show up. And they say, oh my God, this is amazing. I asked you guys about something. I make a good case for it. You hear about it from some other folks, and I see it in the product. So that has been reward enough for many of the customers that we've worked with through this process. Let's see, so with this crisis as a huge market open for PPE suites, related products, let's see. If we follow the MVP, this kind of market opportunities may not materialize. How to be resilient in a crisis. I would say the MVP approach is infinitely more important right now, right? Because in this, when there's a sea change like this, when there's a massive shift in what's going on in the world, there's both huge opportunity and huge unknowns, right? We don't know what kind of products might resonate with people. We may have some theories. We may have some hypotheses about the problems that people are facing and might hear about that, but we might not quite know what someone is actually going to use and what's going to take off. And so I'd say this is right now, if you spend 16 months building something that's going to help people it's probably going to be a little too late. So right now, figure out what can you build in 2 to 16 weeks and get that into people's hands and have them try it out. How often should added features be added? There are many who update every week. So this largely depends upon your, I'd say your level of sophistication and capability as it relates to getting your product stable, getting it tested, and actually publishing it to production. The best companies in the world do this thousands of times every day. So Amazon publishes new updates thousands of times a day. Most mere mortals don't have the level of infrastructure required to actually pull that off. So what I would encourage is sort of more of a middle of the road. I would definitely encourage that you get your engineering discipline to the point where we can release without a whole lot of manual effort. We use automated testing to ensure the product is at a very high level of quality, and we can release often. What I would do is I would take the release sprint approach, meaning I do work in a 2-week sprint. I drive it to a potentially shippable state. I show it to the product owner and the business stakeholders. And at some point they say, yes, we want that. And then in the next sprint, you release. Now, when you get good, it's not going to take an entire 2-week sprint to release. Early on, when you're still working on your process, it might take you 2 weeks to do things manually and do some manual testing. Eventually, the best companies in the world get to a spot where they're doing continuous delivery, where they are now, in fact, releasing all the time on sort of a micro basis. But again, that's extraordinarily difficult. Most companies I've worked with, that would be a really heavy lift to get to that level of discipline. So I would say that you would shoot for, to give you kind of a hard answer, I would shoot for doing at least two 2-week sprints and then release. 2-week sprints and then release. So call that roughly monthly or a little bit longer than monthly. And as your discipline increases, you can release more often. All right, those are all the questions that we had. And Di, were there any that were put in the chat window that we missed?
Nope, I think they all got carried over to the Q&A, and you know, we did go a little bit over on our time together. I appreciate everyone staying on. Thanks again for attending. Thank you, Dave and Tom, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. It was a great presentation.
Thanks. It was a pleasure being here, and thanks everybody for your attention.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day.